What's up, guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today we are taking a look at the making of my latest song. This is a dubstep remix of Nervo's track Anywhere You Go, and I did this for Monster Cat's remix competition, but also just because it was I had an idea for the song. It was a good opportunity to work on a vocal track, and it was ended up being a fun track to write. So I'm going to start off with the drop, go into the individual elements quite a bit here, especially some of the bass stuff. So here we go. So let's start off with that section, actually. So we've got kick, couple of snares layered, this one's got a lot more bite to it. This one's got the punch, so you lay them together, you get it's a pretty nice snare. This is actually just a built-in Ultra Beat preset with a bunch of different hi-hats laid out here. Some reverb and LFO tool to just keep it out of the way of any kick or snare that would come on that beat. So, and they sound kind of loud now, but they end up getting kind of buried in the mix. So where they're kind of sticking out, providing some rhythm and some high end, but not becoming overbearing. For side chaining, I'm actually not technically side chaining. I'm actually it's referred to as ducking. I'm using LFO tool as a MIDI controlled effect, or forget what that's called, but yeah, MIDI controlled effect. So I have a bunch of stuff in a bus sent to it, and so that's just allows me to have a bit more control. That's just on every kick and snare. So let's go into the super saws and then to the bass. So I've got 4 elements layered for these chords. Come on. So first of all, a bass. Got a LFO tool soloed here. And that is a saw and then a sine together with some distortion and then some EQ to get rid of some of the high end. And then we got 3 different super saws. So this one right here, that's your high and airy one. That's your bitey, kind of nasty one. And that's really more of a pad, so that it just fills it out nicely. And I end up having this pad come in calmer sections of the song just full on. And so to keep the consistency, I have it here as well. So let's go into this guy real quick to start. So most of the sound of this bass comes from the wavetable. So what I did in this case was I went ahead and I imported a Virtual Riot growl and made a bass sound out of it. You know, modulated it, filtered it, added effects, all this kind of stuff. Bounced it, and then imported that new growl as another wavetable, and then made this into a growl. So most of the sound comes from the modulation of the wavetable position. So if I click this guy, you can... and let me get rid of this guy. Then if I ditch the effects and the filter and the sub. So that's the original sound. I got this by just kind of playing around, really. It kind of came about as just a result of a bunch of trying random stuff, and this sounded cool, so I went with it. And you hear that kind of that stepper thing comes from this gigantic jump here, so you get this abrupt change. That's where you get that little from. And then I got filtering for wowing, using the high pass filter for that. Sub. And then I have a basically the same version of this modulation so that I can modulate the level of these without you dealing with differences in volume that you have here. So I have both the sub and the level of this and this all modulated. Once again, to bring out that whole stepper effect. And then I have a second wavetable here, which is, this is actually a trick I learned from Virtual Riot from one of his live streams. To have another wavetable and have that one be way quieter and way thinner and have it be much wider. So you have this guy is straight mono, and that's where your power comes from, and then this guy, that's where your width comes from. So together. And also this adds some interest to the tone of it as well, and this is I believe this is a seamless design wavetable. Sub, and then effects. So dimension expander, distortion, and then a flanger with the rate at 0, and then the depth modulated. So then we got it pumped by LFO tool, and you get. And most of the other bass sounds come from that as its basis. So I designed this in a separate session, just kind of playing around with a bunch of sounds. That was the one I kind of was like, oh, this is good. I'll save this and use it later. And then when I heard the Nervo song, I was like, this would be perfect for it. And so I brought it in, modified it a bit, and from there went and tweaked it a bunch to make it work for a bunch of different purposes throughout the track. So, for instance, we have this sound right here. Probably my favorite sound in the track. Kind of this metallic-y sound, but this is basically the exact same thing with a bit of a different modulation setup on the LFO. So basically what I'm doing here is I have the wavetable position of both wavetables and the filter going at half the speed of the level. So you get that rocking back and forth feel. And then I have that layered with this little screech, which is this guy right here. And that is just from FM synthesis. And a weird wavetable. So you got that. And then I believe that this guy is also the same, got the same basis. Yeah. No, it's different. So this guy right here is, I actually don't recall what this wavetable is, but it's a self-made custom wavetable. And the key to this one is that I have the wavetable position and, in this case, remap modulated really, really fast. Same with the filter. But then when you pitch bend it, I have the pitch bend setup here. You end up with kind of one continuous growl, and then I've got a bunch of processing on it as well. And also the reverb filter. Hear the difference. It's also important. Words, an important part of the sound. And so I also use this later on as not such a fast effect, and so you actually get the wobble of it here, I think. Yeah. And so I have a bunch of those kind of cutting in and out. And so those are the primary sounds of the drop. So and this guy, by the way, I forgot to mention, it's pitch bended up first, then down. So that's where that kind of sound comes from. And I did that a few times in different places as little breaks in the beat, for instance. And I think this is a different patch. No, same patch, different modulation. And so if you were to go into the pitch bend automation, you can see it goes. That's a short version, but you get what I'm getting at, because this is the long version. And then let's go into kind of the second half of the drop, which is the vocal section. hear a fair bit of Virtual Riot influence in that section. So one thing I want to point out is what I did with the vocal. So the processing on this is nothing too crazy. I did time stretch it to fit with a new tempo, and so I've got some EQ to bring out the brightness and make it fit with the kind of extreme EQ I have on the master, and then some reverb. I'll be right there. But the cool thing is this delay. So I wanted to have something to fill in the gaps between the vocal whenever she sings, and then there's silence, and I wanted to fill that with something. And so I put on a delay, and then bounced that out, and then have only have that fade in when she's not singing. So you end up with, anywhere you go, I'll be right there. Anywhere you go, I'll be right there. So it ends up with this cool effect. The delay stays out of the way of the vocal, only comes in when it's needed, and gives this kind of ethereal effect. And then in the second half of I pitched the vocal down as well. I ended up kind of burying it because otherwise it sounded weird, but it's there. And then also this, once again, I kind of buried it because it sounded weird, but it was fun to play with this vocoder. Anywhere you go, I'll be right there. So just to stack on some kind of weird effects to lead to a cool feel. I want to jump into the bass sound of the second drop. The wow, wow, wow. This guy right here. There we go. So this is once again in Serum. So most of this comes from the, I'll leave the effects on for now because there's nothing too extreme going on here. Oh, actually we'll just take them off. Why not? So we got the wavetable. I believe this is from another Virtual Riot bass growl. And then I've got mirror on, which is a really, really cool trippy effect, which results in some really weird visuals. And we're also scrubbing through the wavetable just a little bit. And so you can already hear where this is going. Got my wide wavetable again. Bend minus on that. And the real key to this sound is the filter. Once again, I learned this trick from Virtual Riot from another one of his live streams, to use a high-pass filter and modulate it like that because that ends up in this wow sound. People tend to think to use bandpass or low-pass filters, but you can use this because the sub is kind of backfilling that low end anyway. So you can just use a high-pass filter to generate a weird effect, in this case, wowing. Then a comb filter. And then that brings back all the high end that I lost. I have a bit of noise in here too. And then all these volumes, once again, are modulated. So it keeps the sound kind of nice and clean. And then layered with that is this guy. Which is actually from the main bass. So I layered it on there to add some grit and then to keep some consistency. So, all together. The other change in this section is the addition of the lead. As you can hear, it's got a fair amount of glide on it. And then the main thing that is making this sound the way it does is it's a saw wave with the unison cranked and then sync modulated slowly throughout the course of the lead. And also some effects, dimension expander, compression. delay and reverb. So you get this kind of lead guitar kind of sound to it. And so I included this as a layer for the saws here. Need a LFO tool. And then the second half of this, it jumps up an octave. So add some variation, keep it interesting. And finally, let's go into the layering on the verse, because I used a bit more kind of Nexus presets and such on the verse. This is one of the super saws, and I have this heavily filtered. And that doesn't really change until here, which I have going through LFO tool. There's a lot of split tracks because I'm far too lazy to automate a bunch of parameters, and so it's easier for me to just duplicate tracks and deal with a high track count than to have a gazillion tracks of automation on one track. Another pad, nice amount of reverb. And then I believe these are in Alchemy. Yeah. Kind of these glittery, spacey pads. And then a heavily filtered version of the bass that comes up earlier, the sine and saw bass. And then the vocal. You can show me the way I follow. This is who we are, who we are. And from there that builds, and in this Bill, first of all, Bill, I don't know who Bill is, but he's here. Couple of risers. The chords with LFO tool having kicked in by now. Okay, now I open up the filter for the super saws, so that leads right into the super saws kicking in right here. And then I also filtered in like a little snippet of the growl bass. And so that prepares you mentally for the full bass, gives you an idea of what's coming without kind of spoiling it, but it leads it in nicely so the element feels like it belongs with the rest of the song. And then, of course, I believe this is one of the same snares from the drop. The kick with some automation of the high-end low-cut filter. Actually, that might just be the low-cut filter. And then this little vocal chop, which was actually part of the original song. This kind of came about by accident, and so all I had to do was just to bring it up, this little section up in volume, this little. It was kind of perfect for that little before the drop moment. So there you go. That is the making of my remix of Anywhere You Go. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you found it helpful for your own productions. Thank you, everyone, for subscribing and for continuing to watch me muck around with random sounds. So I'll see you guys next time. Peace.